Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed that first segment. Before we get into our second one here of the day, I do want to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined, please consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show. And also, something that you guys have been doing an excellent job of, if you would like to leave any questions, comments, concerns, tips, or donations, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. They're a great way to communicate with me and interact with the show. Get your comments out there. Get your opinions out there. It's not just all about me. I want your guys' input as well, so this show can be bigger and better. But without further ado, let us get into our second segment of the day. We switch our attention back to Thursday Night Football. Tonight's game should be a good one between the New England Patriots and the New York Jets. But I wanted to do a quick segment about players that I believe have the most to prove in this matchup. I think both of these teams are not necessarily the strongest fantasy squads, but they do hold merit in terms of players who are going to have good seasons. I like the Jets roster a lot. Breece Hall, Mike Williams, eventually maybe. But I think that right now, they're far from the cohesive offense they can be. And I know they can be. On the Patriots side of things, we know what to expect, really. We expect a heavy dosage of Ramondre Stevenson and a solid defensive effort from their scrappy defense. But at the end of the day, there's going to come a time when the Patriots' offensive scheme will be called into question. And why not tonight? Why not tonight? I think the Jets feel as if they might have an advantage on the defensive side of the ball this time because their defense has not looked like what it has in recent past. So this feels like the Jets could take an opportunity to have a get-right game, but Ramondre Stevenson is just so good that I have a hard time getting past his kind of integral facets to this offense here. But without further ado, let's just jump right into what some of these big players on both of these teams have to prove. Let's start off with a guy we didn't mention in that little tirade before, Aaron Rodgers. I think the only thing he really has to prove is that A, he continues working into this Jets offense, getting up to speed, getting comfortable with everything, and B, just being a serviceable fantasy quarterback. He's not going to be an eye-popping stats guy. He's going to be someone who gets you 15 to 20 fantasy points and just do it in an efficient manner. For example, last weekend, 176 yards to the air, 2 TDs, 15.14 fantasy points. So, like I said, he's going to be efficient, he's going to be competent, but he's not going to be fancy. And I don't know if you as fantasy managers listening to this will be comfortable with that going forward, but just know that that is what he is at this moment in time. If I were a deeper league, I would immediately say, oh, I can pick him up, put him on my bench. It's a supplementary QB. Maybe in a 2 QB league, I could be fine starting him along with someone who I know can put up better stats. At this current juncture, he's not a starter high-end QB1 anymore, or has pretended to be throughout his career. He's always kind of been this kind of guy who's workmanlike in terms of fantasy. Switching to his backfield partner, Breece Hall here. He's finally starting to find his footing a little bit. Had a decent game. 7 catches, 8 targets, 52 yards, 1 TD against the Titans this week. 62 yards on the ground, 24.4 fantasy points. And the thing with Breece Hall is that you know that eventually Aaron Rodgers will feel comfortable having him as a backfield partner. He's still going to be an X factor in this Jets offense. Yes, I am kind of not necessarily deterred by what Braylon Allen did, but it does give me pause if they're trying to get into a 2 RB system here. But I still think he's going to get the bulk of the carries. He's an effective weapon for them. Can be utilized in so many different ways in the run game, in the receiving game as well. So I'm not necessarily worried about Breece Hall, but I want to see him continue to stay the course in this offense. And in games where he might be frustrated, might be limited a little bit, I want to see him push and continue to try and get as many touches as possible, because that's the way this Jets offense can keep building. And then Mike Williams. Let's talk about Mike. 1 catch, 19 yards in 2 games so far. Only 2.9 fantasy points in 2 games. You can say that, yeah, Aaron Rodgers has his buddies in his receiving core. He has Lazard's. He has Garrett Wilson, one of the high-end wide receiver ones in this league. But my question about this whole thing is, if the Jets were confident in acquiring Mike Williams, then why aren't they utilizing him like he should have been a fascinating acquisition for Aaron Rodgers? Because I understand that Aaron Rodgers is comfortable with who he's comfortable with, but if you want this Jets offense to be clicking, then you have to incorporate a guy who we spent a lot of money on in the offseason. And Mike Williams just hasn't been that guy so far. So the concern with him is that he is going to be someone who's either going to be huge in situational football situations, or he can actually be a high-end wide receiver 2 in this system. And that's what I want to see out of him tonight. Can he continue to grow in this Jets system? Because if he doesn't, then I think it's a huge detriment to the Jets offense and how they're working up to full kind of speed here. And let's go to the Patriots side of things, because the Patriots side of things seems pretty clear-cut in their intent on the offensive side of the ball, but I still want certain players to prove to me that they can be competent at the very least in your fantasy football team. Let's start off, though, with the Patriots defense. Let's look at the Patriots defense for a little bit before we go to the offense. They've had 3 sacks so far, actually 3 sacks in the Seattle game, and they've been the main reason why they've kept on schedule in terms of how they want to win football games. They know that they might be behind the 8 ball in terms of what they can do offensively. That doesn't deter them from using their defensive prowess to try and win football games. So, at the very least, I know that the Patriots defense can pad stats, but I also want to know how to value them in fantasy. Because it's all fine and dandy if you're a team that's trying to win with defense, but it's going to lead to moments where this defense will give up chunk plays, much like we saw against Seattle with that 56-yard touchdown. So I'm not sure what to think of the Patriots defense in terms of fantasy implications, because they have good numbers in terms of the stats, but they are kind of vulnerable to getting hit for a couple of big plays. And maybe the Jets can take advantage of this if, certain offensive pieces are clicking in tonight's game. Then let's go to the offense, because we know Ramondre Stevenson is going to be the focal point of it all. At 21 carries, 81 yards, 1 touchdown against Seattle, for 17 fantasy points. He's going to be the bell cow in the system. I think that Antonio Gibson could get some touches tonight, and I really want him to, because I think he would be an interesting kind of hidden gem in the waiver wire if he does come Tuesday morning. But at the end of the day, I think that what the Patriots have in Ramondre Stevenson is a guy who they know can wear you down for as long as he's on the field. And my only concern with that system is that A, eventually it's going to be figured out, and B, it makes him more prone to injury. So make of Ramondre Stevenson for now what you will. He's a very valuable fantasy asset, but in the future, just know that opposing defenses will be more attuned to the Patriots scheme. It's kind of been a shock to the first 2 teams they faced in Cincinnati and Seattle, but it won't be the Jets. They now know if we stop Ramondre Stevenson, we have a very, very fantastic chance to take over this game. That brings me to the people who I know have to step up for the New England Patriots. Those are the receivers. Listen to these appalling stats here for the New England Patriots receivers. Let's start off with KJ Osborne, a guy who I actually kind of liked coming out of Minnesota. Only 5.1 fantasy points in Week 1, 1.7 in Week 2. Demario Douglas has 0 points for the entire season. 3.2 actually in Week 1. So it's kind of troubling to me that you don't have any kind of contingency plan outside of Ramondre Stevenson, because you have a serviceable enough QB in Jacoby Brissett to distribute the ball equally to your receivers. And your receivers aren't necessarily that bad. Yes, I get that Hunter Henry perhaps is your best full receiver and well-rounded receiver, so to speak, as a tight end. But I like KJ Osborne. You don't necessarily have to be a superstar tight end who's excellent in certain attributes to be a serviceable tight end, wide receiver to a football team. You just have to be serviceable to your quarterback. You just have to make yourselves available to your quarterback. You don't have to run go routes every 15 or so snaps. You just have to make yourselves available. Yes, it's going to be tough against some of the defenses you're going to be facing, but at least make this offense more multi-dimensional than it profiles to be right now, because Ramondre Stevenson is not always going to have good games in the future anymore, because teams are now on to you. So these receivers definitely do need to step up and step into these roles to help supplement Jacoby Brissett, because Jacoby Brissett, for all intents and purposes, as much as he's kind of a backup QB prototype, he's one of the most serviceable ones in the National Football League. And he has started, he has experience as a starter, and most importantly, I think Gerard Mayo actually trusts him to run this offense. That being said, he just needs the trust in his receivers in return. But looking at this game, it's not the prettiest in terms of fantasy implications, but you can certainly find players who will be serviceable to you for this one. But let me know what you think in the comments, because I think it's going to be a weird game. I think that it could go either way. I'm taking the Jets in this one personally, but let me know what you think in the comments. Coming next, we look to a more general Week 3 summation of prop bets here. We have a lot of good games to talk about, a lot of interesting player props to look at as well, but we'll be right back after this short break to talk about them. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports